Greetings from Serbia. Today on the NT Podkast, we are joined by Dr. Benjamin Kilchör, an expert in the Old Testament and Hebrew Bible. Our topic is the fascinating one: are there two flood stories in Genesis? We will explore the J and P source theory, the structure of the text, theological implications, and what this means for modern readers. So, Dr. Ben Kilchör, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, I'm fine. Thanks for the invitation.
I appreciate your time and willingness to come and speak on this topic because this is really hard. But I think this is easy for you because that's your field. So I have a presentation. Let me share that. And yes, we can go slide by slide, commenting. So I will read those questions and there will be verses for people, audience. So let's start with first one. Water sources. Do the water come from above or from below? Or perhaps both directions? Or is it just a rain?
Well, it's an interesting example, of course, because the verses 11 and 12 are related to different sources. Verse 11, in agreement with the creation account of Genesis 1, speaks of waters that are gathered above and below. So we have both there in verse 11. These are separated from each other on the second day of creation in Genesis 1, and therefore verse 11 is assigned to P. Genesis 1 is also P. This means priestly. Verse 12 does not contradict this. Verse 11 says that the separation of the upper and the lower waters took place on the second day of creation. This separation is reversed according to verse 11. So the distinction of them, they come together again. And verse 12 ties in with this by saying that it rains for 40 days. And this is the consequence of verse 11, because verse 11 ends with the floodgates of the sky that broke open. And then when this happened, it rains for 40 days and nights. So I would not see here a contradiction. Of course, if you already have the theory that you have to distinguish sources, you can do it here, but when you just read the text, I think there is no necessity to make a split between the two verses.
Yes, people would say that all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. So this text seems that waters come from below, yeah.
Yes, but also verse 11 has both. The fountains of the great deep, but also the floodgates of the sky broke. So this is both sources. And then verse 12 takes up the second element, the floodgates of the sky, and says that it rained for 40 years because the floodgates of the sky broke open. Or the windows of heaven, as it is in your translation.
Yes, okay, it makes sense. So we have two sources and one, and that's not contradiction, yeah. But how long did the flood last? Was it 150 days or 40 days? We have two sources, so.
Yes, this is quite a complicated issue, and I hope that I can explain it understandable. Maybe it's good also to have a Bible at hand for those who are listening to this podcast. In my view, the Jewish scholar Beno Jacob has solved the problem in his commentary on Genesis, and he argues that we are not dealing with two different dating systems in the J source and P source, but with a continuous dating system that is consistent in itself. In the story of the flood, I try to explain the larger picture of the dating system, because we don't only have these 40 days and 150 days. In the story of the flood, we have two basic types of temporal determination. The first is exact dates, dates with days, months, and sometimes years, the 600 year of Noah. And the second type is just sums of days. And these two with exact dates and just with a number of days can be also combined. The determination with exact data is the perspective of the biblical narrator. The decisive data for this are, it begins with the beginning of the flood, then an exact date when the ark comes to rest, when the tops of the mountains become visible, when the ground is free of water, and when the earth is dry. These are the exact dates. On the other hand, the determination only with sums of days, like 40 days or 150 days, this is Noah's perspective. In this perspective, it does not matter which month it is, but the days are counted. For example, from the narrative date when the tops of the mountains are visible, this is an exact date, then we have 40 days, and then 7 plus 7 plus 7 with 3 times the birds are counted. The thing now about 40 or 150 days is based on a misunderstanding. According to Genesis 7:17, it rains for 40 days and the water rises for 40 days. We have the text here on the sheet on the right side. However, 7:24 does not say, as unfortunately many translations do, that the waters rose for 150 days. Because if this would be the meaning, the waters are rising for 150 days, this would indeed form a contradiction to the previously mentioned 40 days. But in Hebrew, it literally says, the waters were mighty above the earth for 150 days. What Beno Jakob rightly translates as the waters stood above the earth for 150 days. This means that the high water level continues for another 110 days after the 40 days of rain. In other words, the 40 days of rain are included in the 150 days that the waters cover the earth. In the classic documentary hypothesis, it is assumed that the J source or the non-priestly source calculates with the numbers of 40, here the 40 days of rain, and the number of 7, because in the beginning Noah has 7 days, and in the end with the 3 birds you have 3 times 7 days for the 3 doves. This means in the J source the flood lasts 40 plus 21 days. This is 61 days. P on the other hand calculates with the exact dates, including the 150 dates, and the flood in P lasts 370 days. One can just look at the days and count it. 370 days, and Beno Jakob shows that the months in the flood story are calculated as having 30 days each. So a year has 360 days plus 10 days. This is the time of the flood. But if we now take the J dates and the P dates together, the following coherent representation emerges. I hope one can follow it because it's a lot of dates. But maybe one just have to stop the podcast and look at the texts. First, the rain lasts for 40 days when the floods begin. This is J text. The P text says that the water begins to recede 150 days after the flood begins. So this means taken together, the water stands high, so high for another 110 days after 40 days of rain that the ark does not come to rest. This means we have the number 110. This is 150 minus the 40, and 110 is 40 plus 70. So we have again the 40 and the 70 number, the J numbers of 40 and 70, but in the P system. The earth is then completely dry, and Noah leaves the ark on the 17th of the second month of the second year. So after another 220 days, 220 is twice 110, and this means 2 times 40 plus 70. In other words, I try to bring it down. When we take J and P dates together, first it rains for 40 days. Then it takes 40 and 70 days before Noah feels land. Then another 2 times 40 and 70 days before he sets foot on land. We have a counting of 40 and 40 and 70 and 40 and 70 and 40 and 70, and this built the 370 days of the P flood. But this play with 40 and 70 does only work including the 40 days of the J text. It should be emphasized, I think, that this only works if the dates from J and P are considered together. As Beno Jakob comments, he writes, this solves the problem of the chronology of the flood. No calculation could be more transparent and logical. All the information in the text fits together without contradiction. In my view, Beno Jakob has indeed solved the problem by reading the J and P dates together, although it might be a bit complicated to understand the solution by just listening. Maybe one has to read it as Beno Jakob is arguing it. He has written the commentary on German, but there is also an English translation of it available.
Wow, I appreciate your answer, but don't worry if it's a little hard or longer. We make this video for people that can understand well, so no worries. But what do you think about numbers? Because we have 47 Egyptologists would say that this is a number of indefinite period. So even if we have contradictions, 150 and 40 days, but this number 40 is symbolical. So what do you think about that?
Yes, of course, we have the number 40 and also the number of 7 and 70 many times in the Bible, but also outside the Bible in ancient Near Eastern sources. And yes, they are highly symbolic, I think. The number of 40 is known to us also from the life of Moses. It's 3 times 40. We have the generations from the Exodus to the building of the temple, 480, 12 times 40. Personally, I think it's a symbolic number. It's difficult to say what the exact symbolic is. I think it has something also to do with generations. We have it, for example, also in the wilderness story with Moses, where the second generation replaces the first one. So I think the number 40 has something to do with generations. The number 70 is especially in Genesis, but I think in the whole Bible also linked with the number of nations. So we have, after the flood story, we have the table of nations, 70, and in the end of Genesis, we have the family of 70 people of Jacob. So in a sense, I think with the numbers 40 and 70 on the one side, a change of generation is linked. You will see also in Genesis 9:1, after the flood, it's the first time when God not only speaks to Noah, but also to his sons. We have a change of generation in the flood. And on the other hand, because it's a cosmic event and all nations, in a sense, are included, this is the symbolic of the number 70, I think.
Great answer, thank you. Let's go next question. Third, how many birds does Noah send? What types of birds? Why does he send different types of birds? Compare Genesis 8, 7, and 8, raven and the dove. We have text here, so left.
Yeah, to put it again in the context of classical documentary hypothesis, the raven is assigned to the priestly source and the dove to the non-priestly or J source. Traditionally, this is called J because the name of God, Yahweh, is used. Today, it is more often labeled just as non-priestly because there are a lot of discussion if a source J ever existed or not. But these are the labels, and the raven belongs to P, and the dove to J or non-P. But I think it is not very difficult to see that the raven and the dove are two deliberately contrasting birds, black and white, night and day. The raven is unclean, the dove is clean. So they are complementary or even contrasting birds. And I think we have to imagine the ark as a completely closed and dark box. The Hebrew word for ark is an Egyptian loan word, which is thought, not completely sure, but it is thought to be derived from sarcophagus, the ark. The ark is like a tomb, completely dark and closed from the outside. Noah and the animals go into the grave for the flood. The ark is also like a seed that is buried, but contains within itself the life for a new creation. The window in the story is a skylight through which the birds can leave the ark, but it is not a viewing window. So the arks go up, the birds go upwards out the ark. The ark has no window and the door is closed from outside. And now we have first the raven, and the raven flies back and forth, the text says. Just like, by the way, just like the ravens of Elijah, who provide Elijah with food in times of need. The raven. The raven stands for the time of death and hardship, but also the raven stands for God's provision during this time. But the raven is followed by the dove, like night is followed by day. The dove finds a place to live. She finds an olive branch. She leaves the ark because the time of the night and of death is over. So the white bird comes after the black bird, and the clean bird after the unclean bird. Also, in a sense, the washing of the earth is finished, the cleaning of the earth. The documentary hypothesis, unfortunately, completely tears apart the symbolic juxtaposition of raven and dove. And that is my main problem with the documentary hypothesis. It fails to take into account the beauty and well thought out composition of the text, and it assumes that the texts we have were simply created by combining two cut up texts and are therefore incomprehensible in the form in which they have come down to us. But when we read it together, Raven and Dove, I think it's a very nice play also with what happens actually in the story.
Yeah, I recently had a professor Alter, so he is a proponent of the documentary hypothesis, but he also say something like that because when you read the narrative, you must not divide those sources because you will lose artistic and beauty of text. So even he say something like that. But okay,
Yes, but then
next,
the
yeah.
question is for me just if you nevertheless defend documentary hypothesis, then how does it come that you have two completely different stories, and when you put them together, you have this sort of place like the Raven and the Dove. So just by chance they had complementary and contrasting birds. I don't really believe that this is realistic, that by chance things come together this way.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Uh, yeah, next question. Animal sacrifice. When God commands Noah to release the animals so they may multiply, why does Noah then sacrifice some of them? Okay, we have in the right corner again text. So
Yes. Um, it should be noted that the relationship between humans and animals is one of the fundamental themes of the flood story. In the creation story, humans are placed as rulers over the animals. This is Genesis 1, priestly. And the animals are turned toward humans. This is Genesis 2, non-P, so that they come to Adam when he gives them names, the animals. So we already have in Genesis 1 and 2 the motive of the relationship between man, human, and animal goes beyond the source division. This is also true for Noah before the flood. The animals come to him to be kept close to him, in a sense, like they come in the creation story to Adam. They come to Noah. But the flood makes clear a tragic connection, which, for example, Apostle Paul also mentions in Romans 8. The fact that animals are subordinate to humans means that they are also taken into his sin and the judgment of death caused by him. Noah is indeed given the task of preserving the species, but most animals perish in the flood, like most people. Therefore, after the flood, God declares in chapter 9, verses 2 to 4, that from now on, fear and terror will determine the relationship between animals and humans, and that humans may feed on meat as well as plants. So we have this ambivalence and the ambivalent relationship between humans and animals, which is revealed by the flood. And this is already addressed by the fact that Noah receives a double order to gather the animals. On the one hand, he is given the responsibility to ensure the survival of all species, but on the other hand, he must also take 7 of each clean animal with him. And this is aimed already there at the sacrifices after the flood, taking the clean animals. So even before the flood, it becomes clear that the life and the death of the animals is under the rule of man. And after the flood, this becomes clear from the fact that the animals taken or released on the one hand to be fruitful and multiply, but on the other hand, the pure, the clean animals are also sacrificed. So I think here again we have like the dove and the raven. We have a contrasting theme that life and death of animals are related to human, and only taken together you have the complete picture.
Very good answer. Thank you, Dr. Kilchör. I wonder just this question. This is not connected to documentary hypothesis, but how you see this text when Genesis describes Noah that he bring forth sacrifice animals. Is that retrojection from writers from a period of monarchy in 10th century BC, or is this something that really happened? How you see that?
You mean the specifically the thing with the clean and unclean animals, or the whole event?
Yes, that also, but also burnt offerings. Is that a retrojection from perspective of 10th century BC Israelite writers, or is that something that really happened or passed by oral tradition, or how do you see that?
Well, this is a very far-reaching question, and it's difficult to answer it short. But I try to take it like this. So I indeed think that the traditions of the patriarchs and also of the primal history go back beyond or in earlier times as the monarchy. I think we have also even a scribal tradition, continuity between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. This is so the Bronze Age is the pre-monarchical times. I also think that there were sacrifices prior to the priestly institution in Israel, so I don't see a problem there. But nevertheless, I don't think that the flood story is kind of a report that has the main aim to report to us exactly how it happens. But it's more, I think there is a historical event behind it, but it's more in a sense, what does it mean and not how did it happen? I can give you an example. In rabbinic tradition, we have often sayings like, whoever is teaching one person the Torah is creating the whole world, or who is saving one life is saving the whole humanity, things like this. And the idea of this is that in a small event, is the seed of a cosmic event. So in one small event, everything is included. And my idea about the flood story is that the flood story is told as a cosmic event. So I do not follow those scholars who say it's described as a regional or local flood. I think it's flood over all the earth. But this does not mean for me that the historical event necessarily must be a flood that surrounds the whole earth, but the cosmic meaning of a flood that took place sometimes in primal history, which is also remembered in Mesopotamian texts, is described in the flood story. This is how I personally think about it.
Thank you for clarification. It means a lot. So let's move next question. God's repeated promise. How many times does God need to tell Noah that there will be no more floods? We have two mentionings, so that's almost unnecessarily. So what do you think?
Well, we have here on your sheet Genesis 8:21 and Genesis 9:15, but in 8:21, God is not speaking to Noah; He's speaking to his own heart. So he's making a decision, and it is only from chapter 9 that he speaks to Noah. So in the plot of the story, we are first given one of we don't have this very often. We have it in the flood story twice already before the flood. We have such an event where where the narrator gives us a short view in like something into what happens in the heart of God or in the mind of God, and then we are included into his decision, and then he speaks to Noah. And incidentally, as I already mentioned earlier, at the first time in Genesis 9, also to Noah's sons, because after the flood, the issue of progeny arises. But therefore, to give a short answer, it is only 9:15 where God tells Noah that there shall be no more floods. So the two verses are on different levels within the narrative.
I didn't notice that in chapter 8, Lord says that in his heart. Yeah. Okay. Next question. In the first account of the flood, Genesis 6, God commands that he will bring the flood upon the earth, that Noah should take pairs of every living thing, and it concludes by saying that Noah did everything as God, Elohim, commanded him. However, in the repeated version of the story, we find some differences. The Lord, this time Yahweh, tells Noah to enter the ark with 7 pairs of clean animals, male and female, and 2 of each unclean animal. Also 7 pairs of birds. He then says that in 7 days he will send rain on the earth for 40 days and nights and destroy every living creature. And it says that Noah did everything the Lord commanded him in Genesis 7. How is it possible that Noah did this twice? Some argue that this is physically impossible and nonsensical. So, what is your opinion?
With regard to the documentary hypothesis, I would first like to emphasize one point, and you had it already in your question. The first part, the priestly version, ends with the sentence, "So Noah did according to all that Elohim had commanded him." This is first chapter 6, verse 22. The second part, the non-priestly version, ends with the sentence, "So Noah did according to all that Yahweh had commanded him." So both versions end with the exactly same sentence, just the divine names change. This alone shows, in my view, that we are not dealing here with two originally independent flood reports that were more or less cut together without any editorial harmonizations. If this would be the case, by chance, both end with the same sentence. Both texts obviously want to emphasize Noah's obedience with the same last sentence. There is a literary and a theological concept behind it. The first version, the P version, is about the survival of the species. Hence, the universal divine name Elohim is used, because Elohim is all people name God Elohim. This is the universal word for God, as God in the English language. Many religious beings can be called God. but in the second time, the second version is about the special consideration of clean sacrificial animals, and thus the establishment of the Noah covenant after the flood, where he sacrifices, and therefore God's covenant name Yahweh, his specific personal name, is used. This probably answers the question. The point is that not that Noah acts redundantly, but rather that two different aspects of the commission are distinguished from each other and told separately, with emphasis placed on the fact that Noah is obedient to both commissions. One could say we have first the general calling, the universal commission of creation, and then we have the special calling, the specific commission of the covenant. Incidentally, one crucial point is often overlooked because while the first account tells Noah to take a pair of each animal, of each living being, the second account only speaks of cattle and birds, not of animals. All other animal species are not mentioned. If we had the second report alone, we would not know why there are lions, hedgehogs, or deer or snakes existing after the flood, because Noah is not told to save them. These animals are only included in the P text. Although the second report, chapter 7, verses 1 to 5, is classically thought to be the older, the J version, older than the first report, it is precisely here that the second report consistently presupposes and supplements the first. Another example, the P report has Noah make an ark, and we should remember ark is not the common word for ship, but it's an Egyptian loan word, a very specific word. In the J report, the ark is already finished. She is just there. He had never a commandment to make it, and she's called the ark, as in the P text. Which is a very specific word. The J report seems to tacitly assume that Noah has an ark available if he doesn't revert to the P report. So in this text, 7, 1 to 5, in the J text, the ark is just there, and we do not know if we split the sources, where does the ark come from, and what is it?
Fascinating answer, Dr. Kilchör, but can you just please explain a little more because I didn't quite follow this one. We have God saying to Noah, go and take every living being, and Noah says, okay, I will do it. So again, we have that repetition, but this time with clean animals that are 7 pairs and unclean 2. So it is impossible that we have 2 events. So I didn't quite follow that. Please, can you explain again?
Yeah, okay. The first event is just take a pair of each animal, and all animals are included except the fishes. And in the second case, God is only talking about cattle and birds, not about wild animals, not about creeping animals or anything like this, just cattle and birds. And this is because only sacrificial animals are only taken out of cattle and bird. We have, in principle, we have in the later Torah, we have 5 sacrificial animals. We have now I have to get the words to catch the words. We have the cows.
Or something, yeah?
Excuse me?
Maybe types.
Yes, but we have the big ones, the cows, we have the sheep, we have the goats, and we have 2 different types of doves, I think doves and pigeons or so, which are allowed to sacrifice. So we have, in short, we have cattle and birds. So the second report is only about sacrificial animals, and God says to Noah, in principle, first go and take 2 pairs or a pair of each animal, and then now we also have to think about sacrificial animals. Go and take from cattle and birds the clean animals, 7 pairs, but only from the clean ones. because you need them for sacrificial, but from the others you just take a pair, as I already told you. So I think that the first event is Noah picks up pairs of each animals, and the second event is he just catches sacrificial animals additionally, because he needs them for another task. So these are two different goals of the text. One is survival of the species, and the other is having sacrificial animals for the covenant after the flood.
Yes, thank you so much for explanation. We go next. We have in first flood story unique characteristics compared to the second flood story. We have a covenant and human wickedness, Noah's sons, clean and unclean animals, two of each animal, 7 pairs of clean animal, 150 days, 7 days before flood, calendar, 40 days and nights, flood from heaven and earth, rain, raven, dove, laws, sacrifice, rainbow, and here nothing. So is it possible to believe that these are not two stories?
Well, I already have addressed several of these, for example, raven and dove, or species preservation versus killing animals, or also the consistency of the dating information. But I would like to make one more comment. In the classical documentary hypothesis, the second report is assigned to the non-priestly J. And this is here the report, the non-priestly J. This is the report that contains clean and unclean animals, J, not P. The emphasis of the number 7, J, not P. And the sacrifices. All of these are in the non-priestly story. However, the sacrificial laws and the lists of clean and unclean animals are otherwise largely associated with P in the Torah. So the lists with clean and unclean animals we find in Leviticus 11, classical P law. Especially in the book of Leviticus, we have these things. And we already know the emphasis on the number 7, which is in the flood story related to the J source, from the priestly creation account in Genesis 1. So in the priestly account we have 7 in the creation account we have 7 in the priestly account. In the flood account we have 7 in the non-priestly account. So why does the non-priestly account here contain all these priestly issues and concepts? The assignment here with P and J or non-P does, in my view, not fit at all if we look at this. Of course, if we split the two texts and realize that they complement each other quite perfectly, and this is maybe the argument of these two lists here, we can ask ourselves whether perfect complementarity can be explained more easily if two things are independent of each other or if they are consciously juxtaposed. In my opinion, the complementarity is so striking that it cannot have arisen by chance, but only by design, as I already argued, especially with the birds of the raven and dove.
Yes, great answer. Is it possible that we had two traditions, and then in the time of David and Solomon, when would you date Genesis, someone write both traditions? So is it possible to look like that?
Well, I think we do not know which traditions stand behind the text that we have, but my point is not that there may not be two traditions or more traditions, but my point is that we have a intentionally composed text where things are not just cut. We had two sources, they came together, they were cut and put together, and we have now an unreadable text. But whatever happened, someone had a clear concept, have clear juxtapositions, and I still think if this goes back to two stories, then, and these two stories are almost perfectly complementary, then already the two separate stories must have been related to each other in some sense. Then they were something like contrasting stories or something like this, but not completely independent. But in fact, I don't think that we have the empirical data to go behind the text that we have, and I don't think that literary criticism can make reliable judgments of the history of a text. Yeah.
All right, this makes sense to me. Okay, so next question. How do you comment this statement? So this is quotation. In reality, this would not be possible at all. You cannot make some random text and do this with it. You cannot, for example, take a chapter from Shakespeare's Hamlet and say, I will turn this into two stories without adding or removing anything. The only possible reason why this is the case in the Pentateuch is if the canonical text in Genesis was originally two distinct, perfectly coherent stories that were at some point merged into one, and this had to happen without adding or rearranging words or changing the order of any original text. The result of this, as we have seen, is a canonical text full of narrative problems that compel us to do this. Okay, you solved the problems, but can you comment this analogy with Shakespeare? Yeah.
Yeah, well, on the one hand, I would say, of course, Shakespeare is a completely different composition technique. For example, we have the Psalms, and we have the stylistic element in Psalms, which is called parallelism, so that often in one verse you have the second half is mirroring the first half. And there are indeed some Psalms where you could almost throughoutly split the verse in two halves, and then you can make two Psalms of it. This is because you have a repetitive style and you do not tell things from one perspective, but often mirroring things, and this is very strong in the flood story. Therefore, you have this mirroring telling structure. This is there. But I would also look at it from the opposite direction. You can't take any two texts and put them together and get a consistent new text because the two texts happen to be perfectly complementary. So perhaps whoever wrote this quotation is right that you can't divide one Shakespeare text into two, but neither you can just combine two Shakespeare texts into one without any editorial work. So I think it does also not fit the other direction. Incidentally, while I am willing to concede that the division into two reports works reasonably well, I would also not agree in this quote with the formulation that it is that the two split texts are perfectly coherent. I have already pointed to things, for example, that the J text, the ark comes out of nothing. This is not coherent. But there is also an essay of Joshua Berman. This is in a book that I co-edited, Paradigm Change in Pentateuchal Research. And he pointed out several examples where it doesn't work, and I pick out two examples. One is Genesis 6, verse 7. I briefly quote the verse, and Yahweh said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, the creeping thing and the bird of the air, for it grieves me that I have made them. The problem here is in Genesis 6, verse 7, that on the one hand we have the divine name Yahweh, J, which indicates J text. On the other hand, we have the formulation from humans to cattle to creeping things and to the birds of the air, which is a formulation we already know from Genesis 1, the priestly creation text. So we have here a combination of the Yahweh name with priestly language. the usual solution of literary criticism to this problem is to regard the P formulation here as a secondary P addition into a J text. But Berman, I think, has correctly commented that here it is not the theory that solves the problem in the text, because the text has no problem, but it's a problem in the theory that is read back into the text, and then the text is adapted to the theory. This is one example. And the second example, I think this is quite a funny example in my view, is Genesis 7:15-16. I again read the text. And the animals came to Noah into the ark by pairs of every flesh, in which there is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female, as Elohim had commanded him, and Yahweh shut him in. So the text here is completely logical. Noah and his family go into the ark, all the animals go into the ark, and God closes the door. The only problem is the change of the divine name. Because the divine name is regarded as a criterion for the source division, the final sentence, and Yahweh shut him in, is separated in the documentary hypothesis and assigned to J. This results now in the following reconstructed J text. I read it as it is reconstructed if you take the sentence to the J text. And Noah went in, this is now J, Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. And the waters of the flood were upon the earth 7 days, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and Yahweh shut him in. This is the new text. In this constructed text, Yahweh unfortunately locks the door far too late, namely only after it has rained for 40 days and nights. The sentence fits better in its current location, in the P context, despite the change of the divine name. The result that arises when you want to insert it into the J source can hardly be described as perfectly coherent. But of course, when we say, okay, we leave the text as it is, as Elohim commanded him and Yahweh shut him in, then you have to explain the change of the name of God. And here I would follow Beno Jakob again, who writes that we are in the context, Elohim is always the cosmic context, the context of creation, that it goes on after the flood. But now we have in the narrative the point where God closes the door, and Beno Jakob argues that when God is closing the door, he is sealing the ark, as it were, and the seal bears the personal divine name of Yahweh. So because the closing of the ark is a seal, you have to use, or the writer had to use, the personal covenant name of Yahweh. And his Yahweh seal, the elements will neither be able nor willing then to break, so they are safe in the flood.
Yeah, this is great. I didn't know this. So nice example. Thank you for sharing this. Yeah, okay, let's go next. We have some demarcators beside the plot, which are not characteristic of one or the other story. So we have multiple terms that are different. In first story, every creature. In second, all existence. Destroy, wipe out, perish, die, earth, ground, male and female, and male and his mate, Elohim and Yahwist. So are those demarcators something that points to multiple sources?
Yeah, of course, we would have here to look at each individually. I will just pick out a few examples. First, male and female versus male and his mate. Here it is probably sufficient to look at chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. This is the second story, or the non-priestly, the J story. In verse 2, it says male and his mate with regard to the cattle, and in verse 3 it says male and female with regard to the birds. So both formulations are used within the J story, and therefore it is simply wrong to claim that a specific style here can be identified. Other examples would have to be considered, I think, in a broader context. For example, one could show that earth and ground are not the same words for the same thing, that are just used according to the sources, but throughout the primeval history, they are used independently of the source theory specifically, and they have specific meanings. There is, for example, a nice essay on this by the Scandinavian scholar Terje Stordalen. Also, Benno Jakob in his commentary has, I think, very clearly argued that earth and ground, this is in Hebrew, earth is eretz and ground is adamah. They are deliberately used. We have a third word that is also sometimes used. This is sadeh, the field. Belongs to the same semantic context. The same can be shown with regard to the changing of the divine name, as I already addressed in my last podcast with you. So people are invited to look at this if they want to hear what I say on the name of God. I just take one example regarding the name of God from the Noah story. Namely, when Noah blesses his sons in Genesis 9, 26 and 27, he uses, when he blesses Shem, the divine name Yahweh in verse 26, but he uses the more general term Elohim when he blesses Japhet. So he changes the name Noah, the specific name for Shem, and the general name for Japhet. And of course, for Ham and Canaan, he does not use the word of God at all. And even, let's say, hardcore supporters of the documentary hypothesis normally concede here that the change of the divine name cannot be attributed to different sources, but is deliberately used for theological reasons. Because, for example, this is, I think, like Jan Christian Gertz comments it in his Genesis commentary, that from Shem comes Israel, the covenant people of Yahweh, but from Japhet only God-fearers, so they can come close to the covenant of Israel, but they are not part of it. But I would like to make here even another point, namely, especially in the flood story, that some fairly specific language cannot be clearly assigned. So you have here lists of things that can be assigned, but there are also specific language elements which are found in both versions. We have already mentioned two examples. Firstly, the pair clean and unclean, which is here used in the non-P story, but otherwise in the Torah in the P texts. Secondly, also I already referred to the example of Genesis 6:7, where the formulation of creation is combined with the name of God, Yahweh, with the divine name. But a third example stands out in particular. In Genesis 6, verse 9, this is a priestly text. It is said that Noah was righteous and blameless in his generations. Genesis 6:9. Noah was righteous and blameless in his generations. P text. In 7:1, J text, God says to Noah with an obvious backward reference to 6:9 that he found him righteous in this generation. So he uses here a distinctive formulation from P in non-P context. And therefore, when we make lists like this one here on the sheet, we always should see that these are selected examples, but there are many examples where it does not work.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Good answer. And yeah, let's go next. Yeah, so we have some connections between first and creation story and first flood story. So let's see. Another incredible fact that about the two flood stories is that each corresponds to only one of the two creation stories. It is quite clear that the first flood story, which is unmarked, corresponds to the first creation story, Genesis 1, because in both this flood story and the first creation story, only the name Elohim is used for God, and the terms male and female appear, which do not occur in either the second creation story, Genesis 2, or second flood story. So, how you answer this?
Well, with I would disagree with this on several points. Two I have already mentioned. The last thing you said, that a male and female is not used in the second flood story. I just showed that in 7.3 we have a male and female for the birds, the formulation. So there it is not correct. And I already also showed with regard to Genesis 6, 7 that we find creation language from Genesis 1 in this verse, although the name of God Yahweh is used. But there are many more references between the different reports. I give you two examples. In the first example, the priestly flood account is linked to the non-priestly creation account. And in the second example, the non-priestly flood account is linked to the priestly creation account. So I show you that it goes in all directions. There are examples of both combinations, not only priestly and priestly, non-priestly and non-priestly, but also priestly and non-priestly, non-priestly and priestly. So example one, in the non-priestly creation account, the first commandment given in the Garden of Eden is a dietary commandment, which has the logic: you can eat from everything except something. From every tree of the garden you may eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it you will surely die. This is the dietary commandment in the non-priestly creation account. On the other hand, in the priestly flood report, we have a dietary law as the first commandment after the flood in the renewed earth. And it has also the structure: from everything you can eat except from one thing. From everything that lives and moves you may eat, only the blood that is in the flesh you shall not eat. So on the one hand, you can eat from all the trees except one. On the other hand, you can eat from all the animals except for the blood. Later in Leviticus, it says that whoever eats blood must surely die, as the one who eats from the forbidden tree will surely die. So we have here a clear reference between the non-priestly dietary law of the Garden of Eden story and the priestly dietary law of the flood story. This is my first example. The second example is a bit more complicated. This is again something Joshua Berman has shown. The end of the flood is described in the priestly creation narrative, or the end of the flood is described as extending the blessing from the priestly creation narrative. I must formulate it this way, or I begin the sentence otherwise. In the priestly creation account, you have the blessing on Adam to be fruitful and multiply, and this is repeated in the priestly flood account after the flood. And this just ends a parallel between the flood account and the creation account, because we have every day of Genesis 1 with a counterpart after the flood. So we have the 7-day logic of the priestly creation also in the flood story. I just explain it. Most of this is priestly, both in creation and recreation. Creation in Genesis 1 begins with the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, while the flood ends in Genesis 8:1 with God causing the Spirit to pass over the waters. We have there usually the translation wind, but the Hebrew word is ruach. So God sends the Spirit on the water again, Genesis 8:1. The separation then, this is day one. The Spirit of God comes on the water, day one. Day two, second day of creation, we have the separation of the upper and the lower waters. This corresponds in the flood story to the closing of the wells in the depths and the heights. This is day two after the flood. Then day 3 in the creation is that the dry land appears, creation of dry lands, and this corresponds to the appearance of the mountain peaks in the flood story. All of this is so far in both creation and flood story is priestly text, the first 3 days of creation. But what about the vegetation? This is also day 3. The dove, and here we are now in the non-priestly flood account. The dove brings an olive tree and thus indicates that plants are growing. This corresponds to the second half of day 3. Then we read that the dove returns at dusk, which has a parallel in the 4th day, where the sun and moon are created to distinguish day and night. And then the dove finally leaves the ark altogether because she finds a habitat. This corresponds to day 5, when the birds are created. Day 6 then has its parallel again in the priestly flood account when Noah and the animals leave the ark. What we see here in these parallels, so we have all 6 days of creation also in the flood story, but the non-priestly account of the dove serves to create a parallel to the creation days 3 to 5. The plants, olive tree, the change of day and night, the dusk when the dove comes back, and the creation of the birds when the doves leaves the ark and not comes back. So only by combining P and J in Genesis 8 do we have a complete parallel to all the days of creation in Genesis 1. And this means that the story of the dove is related to the non-priestly story of the dove in the flood story is related to the priestly creation account in Genesis 1.
Very good argument. Thank you so much, Dr. Kilchör. Let's move with other parallels. We have the same concepts and words from creation that are used. For example, tehom, we will see in next slide. And through this careful use of words, the flood is depicted as an undoing of creation, a process reversing to the creation from Genesis 1. So we can see on the left side. So this is argument that first flood story uses first creation story, and they are connected, and this is a separate source. Is this a good argument for you?
Well, the fact that the parallels exist does not pose a problem for my view of things. But I believe that I have shown that parallels also exist between the priestly creation account and the non-priestly flood story, and vice versa between the non-priestly creation account and the priestly flood story. And it is therefore wrong to say that there are only references between the first and second stories in each case. I'm not convinced by the argument, if I understand your argument right, of a different relationship between humans and animals in the different creation and flood stories. Is this the argument?
Sorry, can you repeat? I didn't follow.
Yeah, is the argument here also with the, so one is the curse of the ground. Is this also an argument regarding the idea that the relationship of a human and animal is different on the right side?
I think not. Just the home, and then we have blessing over animals, just as in the first story, and later blessing over humans. So we can see here. So, okay, those are parallels. Nobody would deny it, I believe, but you said that we have also in other directions. So, yeah. So, yes, you mentioned dietary shift. We have that humans are vegans and they are given vegetables and 3 fruits to eat. In Flood Story, things change with a direct reference to this shift. Previously, they were only allowed to eat plants, but now they can eat meat, although with some restrictions. This allows us to understand the reasoning for the flood in this version. According to the original state of the world, everyone, both humans and animals, was meant to be peaceful and vegan, coexisting harmoniously. However, by the time of the flood, the earth had become filled with violence, and both humans and animals were killing each other. Because of this, everything, both humans and animals, had to be destroyed. So, arguments is this: we have many parallels, and we have a coherent picture if we follow from creation, first story, and the first story of flood story. So, how you answer this?
Yeah, okay. I thought that this was already implied on the right side of the sheet before. So I'm just not convinced by uh, the argument that we have here in P and in non-P two different concepts. I have already, especially with regard to the relationship of man and animals, how I understand it, how I understand this relationship. Um, just as in the second creation account, all the animals come to Adam so that he can give them names. In the first flood account, all the animals come to Noah so that he can take them into the ark. This is, by the way, another example where the priestly flood story has a parallel to the non-priestly creation story, because it is Genesis 2 where the animals come to Noah, to Adam, and it is the priestly account where all the animals come to Noah, to the ark. The theme of man and animal is already treated comprehensively in the two creation accounts. This is not a new issue in the flood story. We have this in the creation account, and he exercises this dominion, Genesis 1, by giving them names, Genesis 2. The theme of man and animal is there combined, and I think that this also applies to the flood story. Not two different conceptions can be discerned neither in creation nor in the flood. And by the way, maybe I can make another point regarding the animals. The only parallel in the entire Old Testament to the description of one specific animal of the uh, non-priestly creation account, namely the serpent as a beast that creeps on its belly. We have this formulation, the serpent that creeps on its belly, only a second time in the entire Old Testament, and this is Leviticus 11:42, the law of clean and unclean animal, where that which creeps on its belly is described as an abomination. As I said, in the context of laws concerning clean and unclean animals. And this is maybe not directly related to your question, but it shows that also the issue of animals, the relationship of human and animal, also this includes also the relationship of clean and unclean animal, because they are clean and unclean for man, are interconnected, no matter whether it is priestly or non-priestly. Um, it's completely interwoven. So yeah, I think I have now given different examples. I hope I have provided sufficient examples to show that what at first glance seems very plausible, namely that we have two originally separate sources in primal history with different conceptions, theologies, terminologies, divine names, and so on. This proves, I think, to be untenable on closer inspection. Maybe I would again also refer once again to my first podcast that I made with you, where I give many more examples. And my main point in all these examples now that I gave to you is that the problem of the documentary hypothesis, in my view, the main problem is that it has not led to its proponents to understand the text better, but rather that they understand the text worse because they separate what belongs together. they thus miss a large part of the dynamics of the texts, such as the highly symbolic counterpart of the raven and the dove, or of the relationship of animals and human, because they live through Noah, but they are also killed by Noah and killed by man. And I think a theory loses its validity if it leads not to a better but to a reduced understanding of the text. This is, in the end, I think my main point why I try to convince people to abandon this documentary hypothesis and get a new look on the text as a very dynamic and text, and tensions in the text also. Mostly, if you look at them closely, they are part of the dynamics of the text. And this is in literary theory. If you have places in reading a text where you stumble because you think something is wrong, you are good advised to go slowly and look closer, and often you see that this is not something wrong in the text, but something that brings you to slow down your reading tempo and look closer and understand the text better.
Very nice, Dr. Kilchör. I appreciate. And we have non-P text that refers to Leviticus, so that's P source, right?
Yes.
You mentioned example with belly and yeah.
Yes, Leviticus is we have mainly in Leviticus we have P texts, P legislation, and we have also so-called H texts. This is called the holiness legislation, but the H tradition is regarded as presupposing the priestly tradition, so it's something like a movement that comes out of the priestly tradition, and therefore I think the whole book of Leviticus can more or less be regarded as exponent of the larger P tradition. Yes.
All right, thank you. So you nicely explained that when you on surface look text, it sometimes looks like a mess or something, but when you study more, I think you can get some answers. So yes, I will put a link of a podcast with you about two creation stories. We answered all contradictions that I am aware of. So, okay, next question. We have a divine image reference. There is a reference to the image of God, which appears in the first creation story and also in the flood story in Genesis 9:6. So it is important to note that nowhere in the first flood story do we find elements from Genesis 2 or the Garden of Eden.
Well, the divine, the image of God motive, I think one has rather to deal with this in the creation account than in the flood account, because there is a growing awareness in scholarship that in the creation account you have the motive of the man as man. With men I mean man and human, so humans as a image of God, because the formulation that Adam is created in the image of God, or man and woman are created in the image of God, this is in Genesis 1 in the priestly account. But in Genesis 2, then you have this story where God forms Adam like a statue and breathes his breath into Adam. And this is exactly what we have in ancient Near Eastern traditions as how images of God are initiated. So in the beginning they are formed, and then their mouths are opened and their eyes are opened and so on. And therefore I even I have here a book. This is a very nice book of Catherine McDowell, The Image of God in the Garden of Eden. And she shows that you have the image of God motive not only in Genesis 1, but also in Genesis 2, especially, and 3. And in German scholarship, especially, several scholars have, because this is one of the main arguments, not specifically this book, but the same observations, that many German scholars have come to the conclusion that Genesis 1 and 2 are not two independent sources, but that Genesis 2 is written complementary to Genesis 1. So then Genesis 1 is the older account, and Genesis 2 knows Genesis 1 and is a complementary wisdom explanation, and therefore I think it would be wrong to say that when we have the image of God motive in the priestly flood story, that it is only referring to Genesis 1, but it is referring, I think, to the whole creation account, combined Genesis 1 and 2. In short, image of God is not something that is exclusively found in the priestly tradition.
Thank you very much for this example. And we are heading to the end. So we have a ground curse. Yeah, you mentioned this before. Parallels between the second story of flood and the second creation story. We don't have much, but this is, I think, only one. So Genesis 8:21 and Genesis 3:17. This perhaps is the most explicit connection between the second flood story and the second creation story. In the flood story, God promises never again to curse the ground. But when was the ground first cursed? In Genesis 3, in the second creation story. So, yeah, arguments is okay, we have parallels between first flood story and first creation story. Now we have parallels between second creation story and second flood story. So yeah, but you already explained that we have different parallels. But yeah, do you have anything to add?
So I just think we have many references from the flood story to the creation story, and sometimes the links are between P and P, sometimes between non-P and non-P, but also sometimes between non-P and P and non-P. So it, in my view, it goes in all the directions, and therefore I would not regard this as an argument. And I think you also have to take into account that the argument can also become circular, because if you take everything where you find connections between Genesis 1 and the flood story, take as argument that in the flood story it must be P because it's in Genesis 1, then maybe you also try to prove what is already presupposed. But I think even in this case, as I showed, for example, with the argument of the dietary commandments in Genesis 2 and Genesis 9, Genesis 2 non-priestly, Genesis 9 priestly, shows that you also have connections crosswise.
Yes, I found it also circular because you can see text and then, okay, we have some parallels, so I will ascribe this as a P or non-P, so you can do whatever you want. So that's a bit not fair, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, last question about reasons for flood. Reason for flood. In the first story of flood, the reasoning for the flood is that the entire earth is filled with violence. Both humans and animals commit acts of violence. However, in the second flood story, the reason for the flood is that humanity is corrupt. Why then must the animals die if it is humans who are corrupt? Because according to the second creation story, animals exist solely because humans exist. If there were no humans, there would be no need for animals.
I'm in several cases not sure if it is really correct. First, I am not really convinced. I think you refer here to because you say that the entire earth is filled with violence and both humans and animals commit acts of violence. I think the Hebrew formulation there is all flesh. But I'm not sure if the text really wants to say that animals there also wants to be made responsible for their behavior. But I think the complete flood story, in the complete flood story, the animal are in a sense in the hands of humans, and they are suffering. They die, but also they live because of their closeness to human beings. And only after the flood, then they have fear and terror from the humans because they realize this. So I'm not sure if this is correct, that in one of the flood stories, the animals are regarded as co-responsible for the flood. I'm not convinced by this. And the other is, I also not I'm not convinced that in the second creation story animals exist solely because humans exist. I think you are referring here to the story that God brings them to Adam because Adam is alone, and it is not good that Adam is alone. But in my view, um, but this is a discussion about the understanding of creation account, and it depends on how you read Genesis 2 and 1 together. Personally, I think when you presuppose Genesis 1 in Genesis 2, then you have uh, to translate several things in the second creation account in Genesis 2 in a, not sure how it is called correctly, something like the pre-past or something like this. So I don't think in Genesis 2 that the animals are created after Adam, but God brings the animals which he has created before to Adam. Um, and this is how I understand the text there, and therefore I don't think that they exist solely because humans exist, but that also Genesis 2 presupposes the creation order of Genesis 1, that the animals are created prior to Adam, although the perspective is changed because we look at it in Genesis 2 through the eyes of Adam, and then he's there and the animals come to him. Yeah.
Yes, beautiful answer. Thank you, Dr. Kilchör. I just want to ask you about this because we have repetitions all the time, and Berman notes that we have in the J source or non-P source. In one source, we have repetition 40 days in Genesis 7. So they don't feel awkward if they repeat something in their source. But if we find something like that in a different story, then it's argument for multiple sources. So can you comment that?
Yeah, Joshua Berman is absolutely right. And I just recommend all to read his text on the flood story. In fact, he has two texts. I showed you this one in the book that I co-edited, Paradigm Change in Pentateuchal Research. There is another one. Here, a very good book of Joshua Berman, Inconsistency in the Torah, where he also has a chapter on the flood story. And he shows all the inconsistencies in the argument of defenders of source theory, because this is exactly the case when they have in mind already that they have to look for two different sources. Then they take every repetition as an argument that this must be two sources, with a very rigid understanding of how a text has to look. But when they find the same things within their reconstructed sources, they just go over it without using it as an argument for a further splitting, because then you maybe would have to make a J1 and J2 or something like this. And this is, I think, methodologically not honest.
Yes, thank you so much. I had him on show and we talked about all this, but yeah, he's a great scholar and also Richard Auerbach. So yeah, we will continue to call many scholars to talk about this topic. So thank you for your perspective. Yeah. Okay, so do you have anything to add for the end at conclusion?
I just want to encourage people for a close reading of the text and for not too fast splitting things and then not see the relationships anymore. And maybe I can already announce that I think in the second half of this year an essay will be published from me where I deal with the change of the names of God in the complete primal history. So, and I will show there that in my view, throughout all the 11 chapters, the name of God are changed always with a theological motive and not due to two distinct sources.
Amazing. Cannot wait your publication. But Dr. Kilchör, thank you so much for joining us today. And big thanks for your thoughtful insights. So, dear audience, whether you see the flood account as a unified story or a blend of different traditions, it continues to challenge us to reflect on God, human nature, and divine judgment. So, see you next time on the NT Podcast. Goodbye.